Hi, my name's Jos Boys, and I would like to introduce the team who worked on the Scup Perry Chapman Prize, Angelina Wilson and Claire Melhuish and myself. And what we wanted to do was just talk a little bit about the way that we worked on this project, just to give you a bit of background. So I wanted to start with Angelina. Angelina was the major researcher on it. She's a PhD student at Northumbria University. So Angelina, if you could just briefly outline some of the research methods that you used.
Yes, we used focus groups and with students from design, American history and criminal justice. There were small numbers of students in each of the groups and they were self-selecting. So we asked for volunteers and we managed to get somewhere between 3 and about 5 students on each of the groups. First of all, we did focus groups with them and we asked them a number of questions relating to, first of all, previous experience they had of other campuses. So looking at where they'd been in the past, what they thought of those places, and on the open days they'd had, and also at Northumbria when they'd come there, in comparison to these other campuses. We asked them about what sort of spaces they'd used for learning and how they use those spaces. We went through a list of the rooms that they'd used in their learning and asked them to describe the space in terms of the colours and the smells, how they felt about the room when they were in there, what sort of sensations they had, and we also talked about the seating arrangements because that was quite important to a number of the students. We also asked them about what those classrooms reminded them of, and what they felt was missing from those rooms, and what other spaces they had learned used for learning, whether it's at home or other libraries, might have been other public libraries or cafes, and then finally asked them what they would like to see in the ideal learning space. We also asked the same students to complete a 5-day diary. So in there they would, for each day, they would fill out where they'd studied, what type of studying they'd done, the times they'd actually studied in those areas, and for each of the rooms they'd used, there was a photograph taken.
And you did some observations too, didn't you? Tell me about those.
I did, Jos. The observations were to see who was in there, who would actually turn up into that classroom, how they sat and arranged themselves in that room, how they interacted within the room, and basically how they were interacting between themselves and with the tutors as well. So I'm thinking about who was talking, what they were saying, and just generally how they were in that particular learning environment. We also did, for each of the learning spaces that they used, we did a photographic journey from the building where they would actually enter into that building, right up to the learning space that they would use. So that was done actually writing down what the space was like, what was there, and then a photograph of the whole journey. We also did some interviews with staff, and that was done after we'd completed those with the students.
And we also I talked to some of the campus planners. So in terms of talking to the staff, do you think, what do you think they had to add? What do you think that, the ones you were involved in, what do you think was useful about it?
I think some of it confirmed what we'd already found with the students. Other times they would just they would throw more insights into what the students had said. I think it just helped to enrich the data.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think the staff, from their side, they were kind of struggling with the same things in terms of the usability of the space and the way it affected how the actual teaching went. And then, so Angelina had a huge role in doing a lot of the primary research. Claire was more involved as a kind of critical friend because she's had a lot of experience as somebody involved in architecture, but also in kind of ethnographic type methods. And we came to work together on a previous project, which compared two innovative learning spaces, one at the University of Brighton, one at the University of Sussex. So I was just interested in how you thought that connected to this project, or what the overlaps were there.
Yeah, well, I think what's been interesting about this project for me is the way that it's linked between the project that we did together at Brighton, Sussex, looking at learning spaces there, deliberately setting out to use ethnographic methods to undertake a sort of qualitative investigation into how people, staff and students in that case, occupy space in order to evaluate how those spaces were working as learning environments rather than focusing on technology and technological interventions. And I think that was a big part of that project. So yeah, bringing my experience of ethnographic research into the built environment, different kinds of spaces into that. And then linking now to the work that I'm doing here at UCL in the Urban Lab, which is more broadly thinking about how universities are expanding and the kinds of spatial strategies that they're employing in order to grow, and how that intersects with thinking about the right kind of spaces that they need to provide for learning in what has become a very competitive international market. So attracting students from all over the world and staff as well has become of utmost importance to universities. And so these questions are suddenly really coming to the fore as part of a sort of larger conversation about how universities are expanding their physical sites and facilities.
And I think, one of the key things that came up when we were talking about this report more generally with other people from Scup was the importance of having open-ended research methods and how valuable it is to get kind of meaning-laden responses. But at the same time, the fact that that has somehow got to be translated into these bigger strategic moves. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the difficult thing, and the point about ethnographic research and my particular interest is that it's not about using questionnaires and surveys. It's about working with much smaller samples, which arguably may not be so representative, but which at the same time I really believe provide much more in-depth insights that are incredibly valuable in trying to assess these sort of situations. So bringing that sort of rich, in-depth research approach into this picture, and using that as a basis to try and forward suggestions about how larger strategies might be evolved. But again, I think this is the very difficult part of the equation. It's a question of speaking in different languages to different actors in the whole process, and making the case for the validity of this kind of research, really, in a sort of general research environment, which does tend to evaluate quantitative data, measurable data, to give it a bit more value, really.
No, I agree, and I think the report that we did for Scup is obviously it's a very small study, and it was really just very much the beginning of being part of that conversation of how that can happen, how we can on the one hand be much more rich in our investigations, but on the other, be able to turn into something that can inform institutional decision making.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other point that's really important is that this is also about kind of contextualizing this kind of research and really rooting it in specific cases and locations. So it is site-specific research. We're not talking in generalizations. We're talking about specific places. And again, I think, well, again, the work that I'm doing here at UCL is about building up a whole set of case studies. And I do believe that the case study approach, again, has great value, even if it may not be immediately generalizable. It gives you very, very concrete, embedded, rooted data.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's, and I think the other aspect of that which connects for me is you can never separate out the pedagogy from the spaces in which it takes place. You cannot come up you cannot result with conclusions that are kind of, here is a built solution that is going to work in every case. Here is the ideal learning space. It's just not that world, really.
Yeah,
it's just not that place.
It's moving away from the whole idea that you can somehow apply formulas that will produce particular results that work in specific ways, and really understanding that the groups of people who are using these spaces that vary from one place to another place really profoundly affect the way those spaces are experienced and how successful they are as settings for different forms of pedagogical practice.
Yes.
But yes, again, emphasizing the specificity of solutions and trying to move away from this idea of sort of formulaic, kind of more sort of a state-based planning approach, I suppose.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Angelina. Thank you.